By way of intro, my name is Jason Morrison. I'm the president of the Pacific Institute, and I serve as the head of the CO Water Mandate, which is the UN Global Compact's corporate water stewardship commitment platform. And the Pacific Institute and the Global Compact have partnered since 2007 to co-manage the platform. Today, we're going to talk about the imperative for building more resilient water systems in the face of climate change. And I'm going to say a few words to set the stage for this, and then we'll move into the panel format. So when we talk about the global water crisis, what are we talking about? Too little water, too much water, polluted water, failure to meet basic human needs for clean water and sanitation, destruction of ecosystems, and inadequate or failing infrastructure. Let me give a few examples of how these issues play out in practice, starting with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has exposed many vulnerabilities in our global social and environmental systems, with water and the failure to meet basic human needs being chief among them. Matt Damon noted in an event a few weeks ago, water is a PPE. Hand washing, access to clean water are the first lines of defense against the spread of the novel coronavirus. Yet 40% of the world's population, 3 billion people, lack access to hand washing facilities with soap available in their homes. COVID-19 has also exposed vulnerabilities in the business of water provision, whether it be public or private service providers. In many countries, governments have imposed tariff freezes, preventing utilities from charging for household water use. That, coupled with commercial and industrial water use coming to a grinding halt, have led to serious cash flow issues for utilities around the world. And these utilities are also facing the longer term prospect of lower revenues into the foreseeable future and cutting into funds that would otherwise be spent on CapEx infrastructure projects, or even for that matter, O&M of existing infrastructure. Speaking of aging infrastructure and deferred maintenance, in recent weeks here in the US, we had a major dam failure in the state of Michigan. Yet another one of those 500-year flood events that now seems to occur every year or two. And the massive flooding associated with that dam breach risked spread of contaminated toxic sites from abandoned industrial sites downstream. But that's not an isolated concern. According to a US federal agency, over 60% of the nation's Superfund sites are at risk from climate change, including hurricane storm events and flooding that could spread hazardous pollutants into waterways, communities, and farmlands. In the developing country context, this link between flood events and the spread of pollutants are the so-called pollutants of poverty, namely sanitation and related bacteria. But these water-related natural disasters demonstrate the link between climate change and water quality. I hope Letitia will be able to spend some time talking about how green infrastructure and nature-based solutions can help simultaneously build resilience to some of these storm events and shocks, while also simultaneously delivering water quality co-benefits. Shifting gears a little bit. Many of you will have heard an often cited McKinsey study that was done about 10 years ago now that forecast that by the year 2030, we're going to have global water demand outstripping supply by about 40%. And based on newly available data and Andrew's stellar research team at WRI, that estimate is now up to 58%, as in global demand projected to outstrip supply by almost 60%. But what most people fail to understand with these global averages is that certain regions, the situation is going to be even worse. So for example, in Spain, climate scientists have done regional modeling and have forecasted that by 2100, annual average available water supply is going to be reduced by 24%. And in some regions, the country's modeling indicates that available water supply is going to be reduced by up to 40%. The consortium C40 Cities estimates that by the year 2050, almost 700 million people living in 570 cities will face an additional 10% decline in available water supply. And in some cities, Santiago, Cape Town, Melbourne, for example, that decline in freshwater availability could be between 30 and 50%. So while we have historically thought of demand being the variable that increases and supply is static, we have a situation where in parts of the world, the supply side of the equation is also a variable. So in summary, when reviewing these critical water issues, it speaks to the need for three things: to rapidly accelerate our efforts to reduce water stress and to head off this demand-supply overshoot, to build water resilience so that we can withstand these inevitable water system shocks that await us, whether they be future human health pandemics or climate change related. And thirdly, to act urgently to address the basic water needs of our most vulnerable communities around the world. Now, the good news is this global water crisis has been known for a number of years, and it has spurred action from leaders in all segments of society, whether it be governments, businesses, civil society actors. And today we're going to explore what action and leadership looks like and how we can scale some of the most promising approaches, including a flagship initiative of the Seawater Mandates called the Water Resilience Coalition that was launched on World Water Day of this year. And two of the co-founding members of the coalition are on this panel today. We're first going to start with a few remarks from Cora van Nieuwenhuizen of Infrastructure and Water Management. She also serves as a commissioner of the Global Commission on Adaptation. The Netherlands has been a leader on water issues for decades and recently has taken a leadership position on water and climate adaptation. And she's going to speak about the need for emphasizing water resilience as we look to build back better in the aftermath of COVID-19, as she presents the Global Commission on Adaptation and its Water Action Track as a key mechanism to align co-investment among business agencies, multilateral institutions, and the private sector. So Milan, as you're queuing up this video, I just want to do a housekeeping and encourage people to indicate their questions in the chat function, and we will be collating those, and my colleagues will be feeding those to me, so when we have time at the end for Q&A, that we'll be able to feed those questions to the panelists.
Dear water friends, it's a strange experience to speak to you all through a video message. And the reason we do it is even more strange. All around the world, people are struggling with an unexpected and unprecedented disaster, killing hundreds of thousands of people and jeopardizing our global economy. In our recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, it's essential that we recover stronger, we recover better, and we recover together, like the theme of this summit. And therefore, related to water resilience, I have two key messages. In the first place, we must strive together to ensure that the trillions of dollars of recovery money that are spent in the coming period are spent well. And my second message is that the Water Action Track of the Global Commission on Adaptation can help us reach this goal. Let me explain myself in a few more minutes. The COVID-19 pandemic is of unprecedented magnitude. Governments at all levels, multilateral development banks, profit and non-profit organizations are making extra money available. In the first place, to save lives and protect people against the virus, but also to support employment, transport and education, and to avoid all kinds of businesses to collapse. In spending that enormous amount of recovery money, we have the choice between spending it well and prepare our societies for a more resilient future, or waste it on short-term quick wins. The Global Commission on Adaptation, led by Ban Ki-moon, Bill Gates and Kristalina Georgieva, has initiated the Water Action Track. It is collaborating with key stakeholders to make recovery projects sustainable, inclusive, and more adaptive to climate change. My concrete suggestion is to create international teams with experts from the South and the North who can collaborate with governments to assess investments on their ability to contribute to sustainable development. This is already practiced in Vietnam. There, on request of the World Bank, an international team of experts provides input to make projects more resilient. So let's replicate that collaborative way of working and make it a common practice worldwide. Let's step up and make money and organizing power available. Ladies and gentlemen, water is an essential element in the COVID-19 pandemic. Washing our hands with water and soap is a first line of defense. To help trigger the systemic change, the Netherlands will be hosting the first ever global summit of world leaders entirely focused on climate change adaptation. It will be held on January 25th, 2021. The summit will be a state-of-the-art, climate-neutral, virtual conference, streamed worldwide over 24 hours with anchoring events from capitals around the world. With this online conference, we will join forces worldwide to offer hope, energy, and real solutions. Let's ensure that our recovery from the COVID crisis is a resilient one. Thank you.
Great. One of the housekeeping items that I failed to mention earlier is that as audience members of this event, if you want to enlarge any of the speakers in the gallery view, you need to double click on their image. Everyone controls that on their own. So if people hadn't figured that out already, that's an important piece of information. I'll reiterate that if you have questions for our panelists, please use the chat function, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible before the end of the session. So let's move in to the panel discussion. I'm going to ask our speakers to try to keep their remarks brief, 2 to 3 minute interventions so that we can maximize the time that we can have interplay among the panelists. And I'm going to turn to you first, Doug, if I may. Given that Ecolab has a unique B2B relationship with many businesses around water and have a line of sight into how many are thinking about the issue of water and climate resilience, Ecolab and you yourself personally have been spearheading since the outset the launch of this initiative, the Water Resilience Coalition, and hoping you can also talk a little bit about how you think the coalition might be able to address some of these issues that have been identified by your business colleagues.
Great, thank you, and good day to everybody. So I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and certainly there are a number of issues societally going on right now. COVID first, COVID-related economic challenges, and then legitimate and troubling racial unrest because of a number of issues that require real help. And I would say if there's anything common here,
thank you.
All of these issues are affecting really the most vulnerable parts of the population. COVID certainly is. The economic impact as a consequence of COVID is. I'd also say water scarcity and environmental challenges also do as well. And so while the priority to address COVID from a societal standpoint is smart and understandable, it does not mean that climate and water challenges are going to go away. In fact, if you want, COVID is like a house fire. Your house is on a river, the river is rising, and while you're going to put out the fire first, you're still going to have to deal with the potential flooding situation long term. And humans are never going to be good at every 100-year events, but there is really no excuse for our inability to deal with what's going on from a climate and water standpoint. It's clear, it's continually moving, it's not going to sneak up on us, it hasn't, and we've got to make sure that we find a way to simultaneously address this. So you heard a lot of the stats, and they are all real. So today, 1 in 9 folks don't have access to drinking water. Over 2 billion people don't have access to clean water. You heard the stat that 40% or 3 billion folks don't have the ability to do adequate hygiene, which exacerbates the COVID challenge. And again, you just see kind of doubling down on the same population. So we know this is a big issue, but to get after this, you have to understand water consumption. We are the largest provider of water technologies to industry, all the way from extraction industries like mining, et cetera, to steel making, but through the food and beverage cycle and the like. And water is sort of the secret elixir that we use in virtually every manufacturing operation globally. But if you look at consumption, we basically break it down this way. Now, this is an average, and of course, it's not true everywhere. A little under 10% for personal or home use, 70% for agriculture, and about 20% for industry. But those vary hugely by developed and undeveloped economies. In more developed economies, you'll see industry starting to get near 50%, as agriculture use is more efficient in many cases there. But the reason I bring this up is that industry, while it says it's at 20%, completely understates its potential impact. And the reason for that is that industry in many cases also has real influence over the agricultural consumption as well, because it's a key part of supply chains. So the estimate we have is that the top 150 companies can greatly influence a third of the world's water consumption. And we've worked with a number of these companies. We get challenged by the companies. How can we do more? We partner with Carlos and ABI, and Carlos will speak later. And the challenge from ABI continually has been, how do you help us do more with less? How do we run our operations with more efficient use of water? And oh, by the way, when you use less water, you use less energy, and your carbon footprint goes down simultaneously. So the great secret here is reducing water is also an economic benefit to companies. And the reason I bring that up is it's one of the most important factors that we found in linking the two. One, to get attention and raise it up companies, if you will, agenda or priority list. So we believe there's good fodder here. One, we've already made, in some cases, anywhere from 20 to 40% reduction in companies' use of water. That's not immaterial. It then, because brings economic benefit, so the interest in doing more becomes greater as we do this. So we do believe you can make a big difference here. Now, the challenge with water, everybody wants to simplify and think of water as oil. Like it's somehow oil, because it's valuable, is fairly uniformly available around the world. Water is priced much differently than oil. So think of a barrel of oil. I don't know, let's pretend it's $30. The same size barrel of water is going to be worth less than 10 cents. So it's going to be very hard to ship and manage this. It's a different challenge. And this average of 40 to 60% mismatch in supply and demand is an average across the world. You're going to have literally 150% mismatch in some markets and very little mismatch in others. So to get after this, we've really got to prioritize watersheds most at risk if we're going to make a difference. And so this does take common prioritization, hence the idea behind the Water Resilience Coalition, which is really now under the UN CEO water mandate auspices. And we think it's an important idea. It does a couple of things. It really starts by galvanizing the already converted to get out the word. So the early joiners, ABI, one of the first at the table, Ecolab, one of the first at the table, Microsoft, we have Cargill, Starbucks, and others joining. And it's important that this works, but we also have to do much more. And so the idea here is, one, to share best practices, to start getting scale around specific watersheds, because we need to work together to make a difference in a given watershed. ABI can do everything under their power in a given watershed, but likely won't be enough to make a difference in that watershed. So we need them also to be the convener in those areas, to use their know-how to share so that we can make differences as we go through this, which is a lot of the idea around here. Focus the effort, drive best practices, leverage scale, and leverage the convening power that each of the large companies have. And companies are stepping up here, but we have to do much, much more. So today we estimate that through our technology alone, and there are many other people like us, we're not the only people in this business, we're able to save over 200 billion gallons of water a year. Let's say we're going to need to do a 20x of that to make the difference that we need to make going forward. The good news is it is a possibility. So what we're going to encourage, and I'll do it through other opportunities, is we want to get more of the 150 on board, the 150 largest companies, to help drive and facilitate this. You can reach out to Jason, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Carlos or other members of the coalition, and we'll help get you connected and help you sign the pledge to get after this. So with that, Jason, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Doug. You mentioned the working at basin scale, working among stakeholders, not just the business community. I'd like to turn to you, Letitia. UNEP has a long track record of working on issues at the water and climate nexus, and particularly around water resilience through the work on green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. I wonder if you might be able to say a few words about the work of UNEP in this area, and particularly your experience working with the business community in that work. Your microphone is muted. You may need to unmute your mic.
Yes, now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for this kind invitation. It's my pleasure to be here today in this panel. So as the Minister Cora van Nieuwenhuizen of Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands just pointed out, climate change is expressed through water, and the two are inextricably linked. So food security, human health, urban and rural settlements, energy production, industrial development, economic growth, and thriving ecosystems are all climate and water dependent. And this challenge is only going to grow with increasing populations, will require even more food, more energy, more technology, and therefore more demand on our finite freshwater resources. So the business community are already key partners to the UN and will increasingly need to become a part of the solution to cope with competitive demands, pollution and the stresses on water resources to avoid damaging the environment. And meanwhile, developing societies can become more sustainable. So it's fundamental integrating gray and green infrastructure, and this challenge is not a governmental challenge only, but a business sector also has an important role to play in this transformation. And taking an ecosystemic-centric approach can provide valuable solutions to decreasing vulnerability while boosting the resilience of our systems. So measures such as restoring and constructing wetlands, coastal mangroves, forests, and natural food plains are hugely important. They are very important nature-based adaptation approaches to water conservation, as well as climate change mitigation tools. So collectively, these approaches are known as nature-based solutions. But apart all of the politicization of this concept, you can also take this as adaptation or mitigation or ecosystem-based adaptation measures to place people at the center of the interventions. And this is critical for all of us, business and governments and organizations to proceed together in this agenda as part of the complex systems. So these measures are gaining attention and funding and form a core part of the UNEP work in the area of climate and also in the area of ecosystems. So protecting water resources, both surface and groundwater, to ensure the sustainability of these ecosystem services will be as important as augmented storage and water transfer infrastructure to meet increasing demands and to cope with more irregular and infrequent replenishment of urban water supply systems. So companies will have to become more efficient and protect more the water supplies. These include the water springs and river basins and the groundwater as well. So to inform decision-making at national level and for business at the catchment level on how to work towards resilience and sustainability, we need good data and metrics on water availability, on water quality, on accessibility, but also on the water resources. The freshwater ecosystems themselves and their integrity are crucial in this equation. It is very encouraging to hear that business are formulating long-term goals that track the SDG 6, seeking to achieve a net positive impact. So UNEP as the custodian agents for the SDG target 6.6 on freshwater ecosystem. And we has recently launched the Freshwater Ecosystem Explorer platform in partnership with Google and the European Commission Joint Research Center. This award-winning and groundbreaking web-based platform fuses big data and environmental science to monitor global freshwater, opens the door to a new era of data-rich analysis that could reshape how we measure humanity environmental footprint. So colleagues at business sector, my invitation to you is use it, make use of this platform. This is a huge tool for all of us to operate together. So I will stop here, keen to see what are the other questions for UNEP and for me. Thank you very much. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you, Letitia. Appreciate your remarks. So, Andrew, I'm going to turn to you next. WRI has a long-standing body of work around water and climate issues and climate adaptation. WRI is one of the co-leads of the Water Action Track that was mentioned in the Global Commission on Adaptation. I'd like to hear from you a little bit your thoughts on where you think the opportunity for leadership and collaboration among business and other segments of society.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody. I've just been reading through the already very rich list of questions that are coming up on the chat. So let me be brief so we can actually have a conversation here. This is a great initiative. I mean, I commend those who put the Water Resilience Coalition together. It's exactly what is needed. Thank you for doing it. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Letitia. And you, Jason, as sort of the coordinator of this. And it's important that it's the UN Global Compact doing this because in a way it illustrates a new type of almost global governance. If you look at any of the big problems today that certainly we're dealing with, whether it's climate change, whether it's the oceans, you know, whether it's water, the forests, none of them can be solved by governments on their own. None of them can be solved by civil society. None of them can be solved on their own by businesses. They can only be solved if we think of it in terms of a jigsaw puzzle rather than a silver bullet. In other words, we need all players because they bring a different thing. And the COVID crisis has not only demonstrated that we are much more vulnerable than we thought, all of us, but that in particular, the most vulnerable, i.e. the poor, and those of certain ethnic groups are the most affected of all. And this is a wake-up call for us. I mean, we need to repent, quite frankly. The environmental movement, the water movement has not done a good job on thinking about inequity and justice, and certainly hasn't done a good job on thinking about race issues, which now rightly at the very center of things. So we've got to start this discussion understanding this is about people, and the fact that today there are 3 billion people, as you and Doug have just said, that simply cannot have enough water to have hygiene. That is totally and utterly unacceptable. Every dollar invested in water can yield over $6 of return, of which half is health benefits. Overwhelmingly, the benefits go to the poor. We can solve the problem by spending less than 30 cents a person per day worldwide, $114 billion a year. Why is it not happening? It's not happening because we simply haven't had the will. We've taken our eyes off the ball. It's much more exciting to build roads and bridges than it is to do the hard work of water. And to the extent that donor agencies have invested in water, it's been very much in the Watsan sector, which is very good. Obviously that should be the priority, but very, very little on the broader issue of water availability. You think today, you know, what are there, 54 African countries? How many of those African countries today have the best science that enables them to assess their water resources, not only today, but using techniques which we now have available that would enable them to project their water availability, their risks into the future due to population growth, economic growth, and climate change? We know how to do that. Very, very few countries have that capacity, and therefore very few countries have serious plans. Why would we not say, for heaven's sake, 5 years from today, every African country ought to have that? It cannot happen by governments. It's simply there is not enough resources in the hands of governments, and governments don't have the political will. That's why this coalition is so brilliant. That's why coming together, we can do it. And as Minister Cora said so well, you know, we need exactly that kind of partnership if we're going to address adaptation. And we at the World Resources Institute have a privilege of working with the Dutch government and with many others, and together with the Global Center on Adaptation as a key partner in making the Adaptation Commission work. And everyone is invited to be part of that. Much more to say, but I'd rather get to these questions. Thank you.
Andrew. And I'm going to turn immediately to Carlos, a company that has led on water and water stewardship for well over a decade. I would imagine that there couldn't have been a speaker that sets up some of the approaches that ABI has taken to water than some of the remarks that Andre just made. So I'm going to turn it to you to talk about how ABI is addressing this issue and what you see as the role going forward for business and hoping to be a part of the solution around water.
Well, thank you for having me in this panel. It's great to be here with you. I mean, congratulations to the UN Global Compact that continues to drive very important advocacy and discussions with global voices on themes as relevant as this one. Our company's purpose is really to bring people together for a better world. And these days, we should say a better and more equal world, given everything and every conversation that's been going on around race and inequality. There's much to be done. And right now, we have this global health crisis to deal with that's testing the resilience, as was said by a fellow colleague here at the panel, around the world, testing the resilience of communities. And our sustainability approach not only impacts the environment in a positive way, but also builds the resilience in communities where we operate. We're a global business, but we have very strong local footprints. And providing access to safe and sustainable water is key. Even for this COVID crisis, the number one step that everybody agrees is the big deterrent for the virus is wash your hands frequently. And for that, you need water once again. On top of everything else, you need water for cooking, for cleaning, for bathing, for sanitation, for everything. So for us as a business, as Doug said, it's very clear that water is key. Water is the number one ingredient for our products. No water, no beer. It's that simple. And for decades now, we've worked not only within our four walls to consume less water to be more efficient, but also outside of our four walls, mainly with farmers. Because as somebody else said here in the panel, that's where 70% of the water is consumed. So this time around with COVID, once again, we've proven that our footprint can be of use to society, to communities. We provide alcohol sanitizers, emergency water. We use our trucks to get medicines and supplies to hard-hit communities, face masks and shields because we have plastic injection facilities and everything. So we're committed, as always, to be part of the solution because despite being a global business, 95% of what we produce, we hire our colleagues locally, we source raw materials locally, we use the water locally because water cannot be transported, and we brew locally and we sell back to the communities. So for us, whatever is happening in the communities is what's happening with our business. If communities are doing well, we have a chance to do well. If communities are having a tough time, we not only have to chip in and help, but our business then will also suffer. So we're very connected to where and how well our communities do. And that's why we've been working for years now on water conservation and aquifers and also water basins and supplies. We've worked also in partnership with the World Wildlife Fund, with the Nature Conservancy, because as somebody said as well, this problem is too big to be tackled only by a couple of participants. I mean, lots of people have to chip in, especially when you look at partnerships between private and public entities, because everybody has to chip in. The water is a very localized problem. If you have too much water in one country, that doesn't solve the problem in some countries in Latin America or Africa or Asia or even North America, where water is a problem today. And what we started doing now, co-founding this water resilience coalition within the UN ecosystem, is that now we need more than guiding principles. We need more action and things that can get different actions or different initiatives to scale, because this problem is now, cannot wait anymore. Lots of people around the world don't have access to water. We've been working also with Matt Damon and water.org, among a whole bunch of initiatives that we've been participating with our brands and our footprint to get more access to water to people, because people without water have a miserable life, suffer, and don't develop the potential they could be doing. So it's time to scale efforts. The world has a window. This window is about to close, and we need to get water to the top of the agenda, because a lot of our fellow citizens around the world suffer because they don't have access to water. And we believe companies like ours, with a global footprint and a lot of links to communities, can do a lot in scaling up efforts and best practices. So all these efforts can be, used in a way to solve this problem that has been there now for a long time. So it's time to do something about it. And I'm very happy that together with other companies like Ecolab, ABI, and others, we joined together and founded the Water Resilience Coalition, which is all about action plans and scaling up efforts, as opposed to a myriad of local initiatives that don't scale up. So thank you. Back to you, Jason.
Thank you. So what I'd like to suggest we do for the panel going forward is I am getting questions that are fed to me. Instead of targeting any panelist in particular, I'm going to put them out there and see if people have some reflections on the questions as they come through. I am going to ask that you try to keep your interventions fairly brief so that we can get through quite a few of these. And I also invite you to respond to anything that a fellow panelist might have said in response to a question that we're fielding. I want to give another tip on this platform, and that is if you have double-clicked on a particular speaker and enlarged the speaker and the rest are on the right-hand margin, that the way to get it back to gallery view is by double-clicking on that same enlarged screen, and it'll move it back to gallery view for equal-sized pictures. I just learned that midway through the session. So the first question that we got is around what's holding back this transition to water resilience. In the Water Resilience Coalition, we talk about addressing and having a net positive impact on the 3 dimensions of water stress: water availability, water quality, water accessibility. But when, Carlos, you talk about moving things to scale, what are some of the issues that are holding us from making and accelerating that transition? What is it?
I think a couple of things. First, people think this is a competition as opposed to cooperation. So some companies want to do something of their own as opposed to join together forces so we can scale up. And the second thing is to understand that sustainability in water is one of the pillars in any sustainability platform. Is something that can be very good for your business as well. So it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also the right thing for your business. Because as somebody else said, Andrew said, water is involved in any industrial, agriculture, anything in your lives. Everything depends on water as a basic ingredient, raw material. So once we clicked as a company decades ago, that water was not just part of our business. It is our business. That sustainability is not a nice add-on, but it is our business, because without agriculture, farming, water, and energy, there's no business, there's no communities. Then you start thinking differently about it.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh on this question on what is holding back the transition? Doug, I saw your hand come up immediately.
Yeah, I'll just build on Carlos's comments. There are a number of companies doing individual initiatives, but if you're going to make a difference on a given watershed, and if you start putting your facilities and where they're at risk by watershed, you really need to attack that watershed collectively. And if everybody's going after different watersheds and it isn't coordinated in any way, you're not going to make a big enough impact to frankly improve your specific resilience in that given area. And so coordination, we have learned, is important. And this does take much more than just a group of companies. It takes the local community, it takes nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy or Wildlife Fund, et cetera. There's a lot of people who can help do this. But it's really understanding that we are relying and are also at risk because of others' behaviors in that given area. So getting everybody marching concurrently in a given area is really important to shaping and changing outcomes there.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, just to build on that, I think water is one of those very, very difficult issues that's so multi-jurisdictional at so many levels. And what we got now we never had before is we've got guys like Carlos and people that absolutely understand the issue of water at the private sector, and they can start doing things. But in most cases, they're going to need, some, local authority. They're going to need some kind of, river basin authority, and usually river basins don't match into the jurisdictional approaches. Normally you'll have to deal with lots of different local governments. And I think all of us that have been in this field for a long time sort of remember the bad old days when it was just so difficult. And what we've got now for the first time, you're actually getting a lot more modern approaches in countries who are starting to get it. And when you get the World Economic Forum saying the #1 issue of risk or the #2 issue of risk is water, that's now starting to percolate down. But there's still a huge amount of work to be done. The other problem we haven't had up till the other real problem is data and availability. We now have technologies, and looking at Doug here now and looking at Letitia, that, from whether it's Ecolab or whether it's UNEP or whether it's the WRI or lots of other agencies, we now can give truly up-to-date data in a very sophisticated way. We can do the projections, we can do the analysis. So we've got an opening now we've never had before, but we had better seize it, because 3 years from today, countries are going to be spent out. Without spending $10 to $20 trillion in the next 2.5 years, we need to make sure that an adequate amount of that goes to do the kind of thing we're talking about today.
Andrew, Jason, may just quickly jump here. Yes, Andrew, you stole my comment about the importance of reliable data. And this is crucial at this moment. Definitely, we have the best technology now at service of this purpose, but we have also a lot to build in order to have good platforms that can provide reliable data and at the right level, tailored, to the type of decision making and makers that can use. So also impact and protect freshwater and ecosystems and their services. So definitely we are in a world with a lot of data available, but we still have a lot of work to make this data accessible to everybody, and most than everything useful at the decision-making level in many different levels. So I think this is one of the crucial elements here. And for UNEP is definitely, we are custodians of the SDG 6, and we are working actually to have the best guidance and platforms to serve countries, member states, civil society, and business sectors in order to really have the quality and the accessibility of data platforms, reliable data platforms that can really be useful for the decision making. So this is definitely one of the major concerns for us as UNEP. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of the roads ahead that you see. It's not just about current use data and trend data, but really some of this scenario and forecasting. I want to call attention to the WRI tool on flood risk assessment that is now a sister platform with the aqueduct water risk tool. And I think this idea of understanding what that long run for water looks like in particular geographies really is going to be critical to mobilizing the action and the interest among the segments of society to work together toward a more resilient outcome. We're getting close to the top of the hour. I've been informed that we're not going to be turning into a pumpkin. They will let us go a couple of minutes early. I know there are other sessions that people need to jump to as well, but at least we won't have this shut off within the next minute or two. I want to end, though, with one question that I'm hoping that all of you guys will be able to say a few words around. And that is, what is leadership, or what can leadership look like and can be expected of leading companies when it comes to raising the profile of water and to help build a more water resilient future? And Andrew, I've heard you talk about this in the past. Maybe you could get us started, but I'd like for everyone to weigh in on this in their closing remarks.
So the first thing is a leader needs to get their own house in order. Can't influence the rest of the world unless you've got your own house in order, and how great it is to see that happening more and more. And just as we've had science-based targets for greenhouse gas emissions, we now have 900 international companies committed to decarbonize throughout their entire supply chain over the next 3 decades. So too, we're now putting together science-based targets for water. And some of the people on this panel have been heavily involved in that. So first, have a science-based target for yourself to make sure you are net positive and you know exactly where you're going over the longer term. Then influence your peers. And we have learned a lot about what really makes for tipping point crossing in a positive way. It's when people get together, when leaders have soulmates and they talk each other up and they say, my goodness me, he's doing that, she's doing that. I want to have a piece of that. I want to be like that, so to speak. So work with your peers. And that's what's so great about this new coalition. Third, engage governments and the international community. Governments listen to the private sector. As Minister Cora was saying, I mean, actually the Dutch have a very, very interesting approach where the leading private sector CEOs get together with the government each year to talk about what's next on circular economy. What do we do on adaptation? What do we do on water? That has not been the tradition here. I happen to be in Washington, D.C. right now. In the United States, that's not been the tradition. We need to throw away that tradition and have businesses talk with governments, and bringing together it all in multi-stakeholder coalitions with civil society, with science and so on. That's what required. There's a huge learning going on right now about what is it that promotes, disruptive, non-incremental change. We know that we can't solve exponential problems with incremental solutions. We need to learn what is it that will get that tipping point crossed.
Carlos, straight over to you. Any thoughts on what leadership in the business community looks like to accelerate this transition?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First, as Andrew said, you need to deliver results on your own. So you need to put your house in order. Second, you need to understand that this only makes a difference if it can be scaled up. So partnerships and collaboration is at the top of the agenda. And third, you need to do it the right way in terms of viability and feasibility. So other companies understand that this is connected to their business. And if they don't understand, they're going to be hitting a wall pretty soon. So we have to promote this idea that's not only the right thing to do, but it's good for the communities and therefore good for your business, because you depend on communities and you live in those communities, right? So, and the other thing is to do more and more crowdsourcing. There are 8 billion people around the world, and for us to think that only our people from our companies here on this panel have the best ideas is really far from reality. So in our company, for example, together with others, we have now for the 4th year done what we call the accelerator, and that's all around the platforms of our sustainability, which is around energy, water, farming, and packaging. And it's amazing to see once you open up to the whole world to participate and do crowdsourcing, and you select the best ideas, you do a boot camp so they can really get that idea and start doing prototypes and testing and having a minimum viable product to test in the market. We give them support. And at the end, we choose the best and we invest and finance them so they can really, and it's amazing. If I look back now, there are already 2 or 3 that went to scale that are making a difference in our business, but also other businesses. So this idea that there are 8 billion people out there, and not just the 100,000 people that work for our companies will have always the best ideas, in building such platforms so everybody can chip in, because everybody understands what those problems are. And a lot of people are very creative and they have solutions. So enabling that's a big part of leadership as well.
Fantastic. So Letitia, I'm going to turn to you for your concluding remarks, and then Doug, ask if you can take us home with the closing remarks for the session. Letitia, over to you.
Excellent, thank you. And to coin a phrase, water is a connector, not a sector. So this is definitely my key message. And this coalition is a connection, a very good connection, and it has to be bigger, more inclusive, and even more influent. So we need business leadership that understands how to utilize and manage water whilst protecting the water sources under the increasing demands and the stresses. So companies can help solve this equation, I have no doubt about it, through innovations that reduce water demand and reduce pollution, in crafting business models that not only meet company interests, but also contribute to long-term sustainability and health of the freshwater ecosystems. So I think it was mentioned at the very beginning, so water is not your business, water is you. So this is the message, and I think this coalition is really a very good representation of this connection. So a pleasure to be here, thank you.
Thank you for being here. Doug, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just build on the comments that have already been stated. You know, first of all, you can't sit in your driveway waiting for all the lights to turn green before you set movement. And while we don't have perfect answers to all these challenges, starting to move, build knowledge, build coalitions, and build partnerships where they matter, we believe is very important. And mostly humans learn by doing. And so just getting after this and learning how to do it, we will make mistakes. We will be not ideal in some situations, but reducing water in every case is better than not moving at all. Second, we've learned that awareness is really uneven. You have, so Carlos was obviously ahead of most of industry, understanding the importance, maybe nature of the business, but still ABI has been a leader in understanding and how to go drive savings and then work up their supply chain. Not everybody is aware. And so everybody, though, counts on water. Automobile manufacturing, data center. There is not an industry that doesn't count on this. So we're spending a lot of time building awareness that their resilience is at risk as a consequence of water. And they need to get to the table and they need to measure and quantify this risk so that they become the converted and also start partnering on this, if you will, watershed by watershed initiative. And finally, to build on Carlos's other comment, which was really the crowdsourcing, we have learned a lot by partnering and doing nature-based solutions. So this is clearly a demand issue and we can reduce demand. That is part of the problem. We've got to increase supply. And part of the way you can increase supply is frankly restoring watersheds, particularly at the source. So I sit here right now, as I look that way, I look at the Mississippi River. And we are working right now with the Nature Conservancy, if you will, to restore the Mississippi River's ability to produce clean water at the source. And so this kind of work is also really invaluable when you start looking at watersheds, understanding not only how do I bring down demand, but how do I improve supply for the whole community. So it's a combination of efforts. And I would just say, Jason, thank you to you, Andrew, Letitia, et cetera, just for the leadership that you've shown and also giving us the opportunity to come under the UNCEO water mandate and to start driving this change for the WRC. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for your time today and your insightful remarks. In closing, I want to recall some of the conversation that I was involved in at COP25 in Madrid. And a number of the speakers had come to the conclusion that water is to climate adaptation what energy has been recognized to be to climate mitigation, and that we need to be thinking about our structures and our systems in a way that can allow water to be at the centerpiece of climate adaptation strategies. And then finally, for those that are attending today's session and representing the business community or members of the UN Global Compact, we encourage you to take the pledge and join the coalition. And I understand today, Danone has announced that it has joined the coalition. So hopefully throughout the next 24 hours, we will have more companies that will make a commitment and these short goals around water and to addressing water stress at the basin scale. So thank you all for your time and have a good rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.